Yeah, you guys should just prepare for something very interesting this week.
You don't fuck with a god.
What's going on, nomads, sweaty people, and strangers everywhere across the internet? My name is V, and welcome back to Lion's Rant, the only show where I'm basically going off the cuff with a lot of stuff that might be very passionate or very anger-filled, where today is actually the former rather than the latter. Surprising, I know, because of the intro being very anger-filled. You see, this time, I was going to do something about a rant about how comedy has pretty much become a big no-no for a lot of people due to the PC culture, but this time I'm kind of gonna tone down on the fury for now to give you guys just something a little bit of a more positive rant. And this is one I actually learned from he's more of an acquaintance than a friend, of someone who legitimately told me when I first met him his name was Rami, short for Romulus, even though his actual name is Abraham.
Soka.
Today, we're talking about a rant about how, I guess the only way to describe this rant is how love itself can transcend countries and boundaries. Now, the story I've heard from Rami goes back to when he was 5 years old living in Poland. He had a big family that moved out there from Greece, and so he just remembered the whole thing about Romulus and Remus from Roman mythology, from a bunch of reading stuff, and then he was like, oh, cool, I guess I'll just call myself Rami because I live. It's like, okay, that's an interesting part of the story, but I thought you were telling me something interesting. So he gets into the story about how he had a pen pal that was located all the way in none other than the US of A, in Alaska, nonetheless, of a little half Inuit, half American girl by the name of Portia. Now, Rami and Portia were actually just originally pen pals that just happened to have a small little chain letter that happened by happenstance. No one knows how the chain letter got to his house, how it transpired to get to said house, or even what even led that to show up at his house to begin with. But he just sent it off into the wind. It ended up in Portia's house, and when she just all of a sudden saw it, she sent back the chain letter as if a whole thing of I don't talk to strangers. So normally people would be like, oh, well, I guess since it's someone that doesn't want to do this, fine. But Rami was different. He wrote back to this person trying to get to know her, first by trying to see why she didn't trust anyone from the chain letter. And then it just became a back and forth thing of, I still don't know you. And then it became a whole thing of, I'm so-and-so, I do X amount of hobbies, I am this amount of ages, and it has transpired for them from the ages of 5 all the way to, I would say, from how the story pans out, from the way Rami says it, it was about 6 years. They were just writing back to one another on the daily. And might I add, the story was set during the late 80s, early 90s. So he was on the cusp of there about to be technology during the time period where he was finally 12 years old. Computers were finally going to be a thing, especially in the European area. So he could have obviously emailed her at some point, but he decided to stick with the written word, as did Portia, where they just automatically at the age of 12 all of a sudden started sending romantic letters to basically signify that they were a couple. And when I was asking Rami about this, he was saying that during the time that he was writing letters back and forth, a lot of people were approaching him about maybe dating some friends in the local area. And he turned all of them down to simply write back and forth with Portia, exchanging Polaroids here and there in letters and formats of so forth and so on, going back and forth months at a time, all the way again even more years later when they're about to hit 19. This is around like the late 90s, on the cusp of the 2000s. And when they're getting to this point, it's just like, man, I would really love to be with this person. But neither one writes about it because at the time, like most people when it comes to long distance stuff, they didn't want to say anything to jinx it because a lot of people, even during the written word, often thought the worst if someone were to say the obvious. But there is a silver lining with the story. Because of all the stuff of just keeping to himself and just doing small stuff that he didn't mention in the story, because apparently he had 3 jobs going on to afford the surprise. When I asked him about this, he was like, that's not important to the story, Vince. Just sit down. Like, sit down. Muff, I need to fucking know! What were you doing besides writing these goddamn letters? He's like, just calm the fuck down. Here's a brownie. You know it's inside. Anyway, he then proceeds to say that the next letter will be the last one because he has to do something with his parents that will keep him preoccupied for a month. That was a lie. In actuality, he was spending the entire month trying to literally move himself from Poland to Alaska to be with Portia. And after the month passed, when she was waiting on a letter, what happens other than she actually goes out to her mailbox to find Rami walking down to see her? Now, initially it was from shock and a little bit of anger for just not saying anything, but eventually it then just translated into an actual lovers fest. They were elated to be together, and Rami was going there to make it permanent as a one-way trip to be an American citizen to be with Portia. They've been together since then. By the time it was around 2000, they got married. And then afterwards, they pretty much decided to have a happy life. At the time I'm basically remembering this story now to tell you all, they have at least 2 kids. One that's actually 18 years old and one that's, I think, 15. Both of which are doing alright underneath their parents. But the reason I'm telling you guys this about the whole love crosses over boundaries and so forth and so on is because a lot of people in this day and age oftentimes want to use the crutch of love is by happenstance. And the best thing you want to do is just settle. And I'm here to give you guys just at least one example of you don't have to settle. Life is short. And if you try to forsake anything that's of real substance, that's how you end up truly alone. If you work at something that you know is right, then that's how you know it's something that you're going to want forever. Now, I personally would do anything for the person that I already know is the one for me. I've met her and I've lost her, but I will find her again. I've promised that to myself. So if I'm willing to just trudge through stuff here and there and have a middle before I go to my happy ending, I'm gonna be open and honest and say I'm gonna trudge through and try to get the Rami and Portia ending of trying to literally cross through many boundaries to get with the one. And frankly, that's all that it is. You guys can either accept that as my whole thing and we have a debate about everything about what I've just said as pros and cons with that mentality. You guys could say I agree with this and I also want to elaborate on this part. But if you guys just want to bash on this and say this was the most bullshit thing in your life, I only have one small thing for you.
I don't got a lot of patience. Funny cause I got the remedy. All of my enemies showing their faces. They trying to get rid of me. They want the end of me. Woo! Goodness gracious, but they gon' pick up a blade. I'm feeling like Jason.